It continues to be the single most important fact of American political life that the largest portion of American voters in recent American history, if not ever, no longer trust any of the core central institutions of authority and power in the United States. And that is, if you think about it, an extremely poor state of affairs for any society. We need reliable and trustworthy institutions to administer the law, to create the appearance that the law is being administered fairly and equally, to issue decrees in times of war or in times of medical crises that people can place their faith and trust in, and just in general to have a working set of facts that are given to us by the media that we believe are true. The citizenry needs that. It benefits from having a set of institutions that it can trust. And by and large, in American history, people have largely supported those institutions, whether they identify as Republicans or Democrats, whether on the left or the right. Obviously, there are lots of exceptions. There's been distrust in American history, but in general, the vast majority of American citizens have placed their faith and trust in leading institutions of media, of law enforcement, of science and health, and that has all collapsed. And it collapsed more or less coinciding with the emergence of Donald Trump, though I don't think he was the cause of it. I think he was one of the people who first perceived how great of a sentiment this was in the American populace, and he gave voice to it. He became what he said he wanted to be, which was the vessel for the forgotten person, the person who perceives that these institutions have abandoned them, that they only care about a tiny sliver of the population. Now, one of the remarkable things about 2024 and the presidential race that we just started with the Iowa caucus last night is that we have a situation we have never previously had in American politics, ever in the history of this country. The candidate that is leading essentially all polls, but now I think it's safe to say he is the front runner for the presidency, is not only facing 4 criminal processes, separate cases in 4 separate jurisdictions where he's accused of felonies in each and every one of them, but he has been formally indicted and faces the very real prospect of prison, not 10 years from now or 5 years from now, but this year. These cases are going to trial. And they're not going to go to trial until many of these states have voted. And what it looks very likely, based on the results last night, is that we're going to have a situation where huge numbers of people, millions and millions of Americans, by a very large margin, are making very clear, crystal clear, unmistakably clear, that the person they want to be their president is Donald Trump. And after months of watching this, Jack Smith and the prosecutors in Atlanta and in Manhattan are going to march into courtrooms and they're going to argue that that same person should be put in prison. If there's any recipe for unrest, civic unrest, I can't imagine what would be better if that were your goal than watching all these races and all these elections and hearing the outcome of all these people going to vote and then taking the person they want to make their president and doing everything possible to imprison him and kick him off ballots and render him ineligible to run. I actually watched that happen in Brazil twice. In 2018, when Lula da Silva was the front runner in polls and he was arrested and made ineligible, and that's what paved the way for Jair Bolsonaro to win that race. He might have won anyway, Bolsonaro, but the polls were showing Lula in front. And then once Lula won, ever since that election, Bolsonaro being his main political opponent, he has now been declared ineligible to run in the next election, and they're trying to imprison him as well. And it's a recipe for extreme unrest. We saw a little glimpse of it in Brazil. We've seen a little glimpse of it in the United States with January 8th in Brazil, January 6th in the United States, but so much worse will come if we continue down this path. But the remarkable part about it is that even though he's been indicted 4 separate times, he not only is maintaining his political support, he has clearly increased it. He has clearly consolidated all the support he had and then gained more. And if you think about what that says, what that necessarily says, it is actually kind of frightening if you care about political stability in your country. But it's also very well deserved. What it's saying is that we know that the Justice Department and various prosecutors are accusing Donald Trump of being a felon and are trying to put him in prison. But it doesn't affect our opinion of him and his fitness to be the president because we don't trust those institutions to administer the law. We don't believe in the Justice Department. We don't believe in the FBI. We don't believe in prosecutors in this country. We believe that those institutions of power have been weaponized, have been commandeered, have been corrupted. And there is no way to read the outcome of this election thus far, even last night's vote, which you can dismiss as being a caucus, only one state, which is Iowa. All that's true, but Trump didn't even win Iowa in 2016. He was over 50% of the vote. He won by 30 points, even though tens and tens of millions of dollars were first poured into Ron DeSantis and then into Nikki Haley. It did nothing. People have tuned out establishment voices. That is the only conclusion you can reach. And if you're like me and you believe those establishment sectors and those establishment institutions are deeply corrupted, then in one way you should be celebratory about that fact, that they really have lost the faith and trust of almost everybody other than partisan Democrats, the only ones who trust these institutions. But if you also value civic stability and just a general peace in the body politic, it should be something very concerning. Generally, good things do not happen once people lose faith in their institutions of authority and they no longer trust that authority is being exercised legitimately. Now, here's a poll that was taken recently, and it was compiled by the Financial Times and by YouGov. It was published by the Financial Times, by the data editor there. And the poll basically asks, here are the largest media corporations in the United States. Tell us whether or not you trust these institutions, these media institutions, these media corporations to tell you the truth about what's happening. And one of the points they were trying to make in this poll was that in the United States, there's a very wide gap between who Democrats trust and who Republicans trust, whereas in the UK, more or less the left and the right have the same opinions of the same news agencies. There's not this massive gap. There's a lot of negativity and a lot of distrust, but more or less, the Tories and the Laborites see things more or less the same, whereas in the United States, they see things radically differently. And that is an interesting part of American political life. We know that to be true, that people on the left and liberals sit over here consuming one set of media outlets that feed them what they want to hear. People on the right sit over here consuming their own set of media. And there's almost no intersection any longer, which itself is kind of dangerous. And that's part of the collapse of the faith in media institutions. And if you look at this polling data, and you can see here, you have these institutions here like Bloomberg and the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Yahoo News, The Hill, Politico, Axios. And what you see here, these blue dots are how much Democrats trust these institutions, these media outlets. So amazingly, every one of these, including National Review, which has become an anti-Trump magazine, so a lot of liberals like it, Democrats overwhelmingly trust these institutions. This is not 40% of Democrats trusting the New York Times and Bloomberg and the Atlantic and Politico and Axios. This is a plus 40% difference. So it probably is something like 70% of Democrats saying they trust the New York Times, 30% saying that they don't. It's a 40% difference with the Atlantic, with the New Yorker, with Politico, with Axios, with CNN, with MSNBC, with Slate, with HuffPost, with the Daily Beast. It is amazing that Democrats, people who identify as Democrats, overwhelmingly trust the largest media corporations to tell them the truth. Imagine being so gullible that you believe the world's largest media corporations are there to help you understand the world rather than to mislead and propagandize you. And meanwhile, it's Republicans who have overwhelming distrust in all of these institutions. You can see the only exceptions here for Newsmax is one of the few that you can see there. The red dot shows that Republicans trust Newsmax. The same for Fox News is down below on this chart. I don't know. I can try and minimize it. Here's Fox News. You see here. You see that red dot there, which shows you that that's one of the very, very few that Democrats don't trust or Republicans do. But overwhelmingly, these institutions of authority still have the trust of the Democratic Party. The Democrats trust the CIA and the FBI, as we've shown you many times. They trust the Justice Department. They trust prosecutors. They trust Homeland Security. They trust the NSA. They love the U.S. security state. And they love large media corporations. Nobody else trusts these institutions, which is why independents and Republicans continue to back Trump overwhelmingly, despite the fact that 4 separate times, major law enforcement institutions in this country have said that he is guilty of felonies. Now, here is the New York Times story on this, and I'm going to go ahead and let everybody else fix what's going on there since I messed it up a little bit. But basically, here's the New York Times account of what happened yesterday. And you see the headline, "The most durable force in American politics, Trump's ties to his voters." And the article says the following: Donald J. Trump, decisive victory in Iowa revealed a new depth to the reservoir of devotion inside his party. For 8 years, he had nurtured a relationship with his supporters with little precedent in politics. He validates them, he entertains them, he speaks for them, and he uses them for his political and legal advantage. Now, this is the New York Times trying to grapple with the fact that they have been spending 7 years now, every day almost, warning everybody that Trump is a criminal, that Trump is controlled by Russia, that Trump is corrupt, that he's a fascist, that he's a white nationalist, that he's a racist. The New York Times just editorialized yesterday. We showed you that it's the moral duty of every citizen to do everything possible to stop Trump, and they ignored the New York Times, of course, and went to the polls in massive numbers, never before seen numbers, and voted for the person that the establishment told them not to vote for. And so here's the New York Times trying to mock and minimize this connection because they can't understand it, they can't control it, so they want to deride it and turn it into something nefarious. This connection, says the New York Times, a hard-earned bond for some, a cult of personality to others, has unleashed one of the most durable forces in American politics. Now, the reason why this is such a sad effort on the part of the New York Times to mock this Trump movement that they cannot control and cannot understand 8 years after they first elected, or 6 years after they first elected Trump president, is because it isn't just Trump supporters. If it were only Trump supporters, he would be winning 35% of the vote. He would have 30% of the vote in polls. And yet, it's not just inside the Republican Party, but in the American electorate at large, where huge numbers of people are prepared to vote for Donald Trump in 2024. And these institutions of authority, like the New York Times, that speak for them, should be saying to themselves, we've been saying this for so many years as poll after poll after poll shows a collapse of faith and trust in American media institutions. They ought to be doing some self-reflection about this. They ought to be saying, what is it that we have done to lose the trust and faith of so many people, to make arguably the majority of the country deeply hate us and distrust us? What is it that we've done to contribute to this and to cause this? And people who work inside the U.S. government, inside the security state, should be asking, why is it that we are so hated and distrusted? We, the FBI, we, the Justice Department, we, the U.S. security state, that if we accuse somebody of being a felon, something that used to destroy their political viability, instantly, it now seems to strengthen them among most voters. But instead of engaging in that self-reflection, which is what a healthy institution of authority would do, a healthy power center would do, they're instead lashing out and blaming the people who refuse to obey them. They're a cult figure, they're cult followers. Trump uses them, he entertains them, he deceives them, they're stupid, he mocks, he misleads them, he convinces them that we at the New York Times aren't trustworthy. That's all they're left to do is lash out. They know they're losing control. They have done, what else can they do to Donald Trump? And they just watched him, after everything they've done, all the money they poured into this race, get a 30-point victory never before seen in modern political history in a contested Iowa caucus. Here is the actual vote total, the final vote total by the Associated Press. There you see Trump at 51%. DeSantis finished in second, which also upsets the establishment. They really wanted what Nikki Haley hilariously tried to claim she got, which was a two-person race between Trump and Nikki Haley, but instead they couldn't even get Nikki Haley into second place. She was in third. There was DeSantis in second, and then Vivek Ramaswamy ended up with, I believe, something like 7%. He has now dropped out and endorsed Trump. So this is the race. It is, of course, possible, but extremely difficult to see any path that could result in Donald Trump not winning unless he's removed from the ballot. This is a failure of monumental proportions on the part of the establishment, and they know it. Now, that's why their first plan was, let's try and do everything we can, pour hundreds of millions of dollars to dissuade and deceive and manipulate and propagandize these people not to vote how they want. Let's try and pump up Nikki Haley and get her to be the nominee. But if that fails, they're not going to go away. They're not going to accept the decision of the American public. Their real goal is to imprison Trump and to get him off the ballot. They want to put him in prison. And there's a very real chance that he will be convicted in one of these cases. Remember, these are in Washington, D.C., in Manhattan, that's where the jury's coming from, in Atlanta, and then in South Florida. It is not difficult to imagine with hostile judges and all the energy and effort of the Justice Department seeing him convicted. And if he's convicted of a felony, they're going to send him to prison. And he may very well be running as a convicted felon. And that will be the real test for just how broken establishment power is. Here is Steve Kornacki, who, despite being at MSNBC, is someone I think is actually a very trustworthy and honest analyst of polling data and political opinion. He really tries hard to say what he thinks without regard to who he alienates, and it's a rare attribute, so he deserves credit for exhibiting it. And he said the following about polling data. Quote, the shift came abruptly, a clear rally around Trump effect among Republican voters when news of the first indictment by the Manhattan DA broke in March of 2023. Look how the polling average diverged at that moment and never looked back. And you can see here what he's talking about. This was the moment in March of 2023 when DeSantis was actually pretty close to Trump. And there was a pretty small gap here. And then Alvin Bragg, the liberal Manhattan district attorney, who got elected with the help of George Soros money, skyrocketed. Basically, DeSantis began to collapse. And although I think there's other causes, including DeSantis not being a very good politician, not a very comfortable politician dealing with people, which matters, he came off very stiff. The reality is that it not only didn't hurt Trump to indict him, it actually helped him, because that Manhattan case, of all the cases, I think was the most frivolous and the most blatantly politicized. And it really set the tone for how the next set of indictments was perceived. Here is the New York Times, the new NBC News rather, in July of 2023, with polling data on how Americans view the FBI and the DOJ. The title was Americans Sour on the FBI and DOJ Amid Trump Investigations. A new MSNBC and New York NBC News poll found that Americans' attitudes toward the Department of Justice and FBI are not positive. Quote, views of the agency have soured since October 2018, when 52% of Americans had a positive opinion of the FBI and just 18% had a negative opinion. That was as recently as 2018, 52 to 18 in favor of the FBI. This month's negative numbers are buoyed by Republicans. Among GOP voters, just 17% have a positive view of the FBI, while 56% have a negative view. And again, they try and say it's because the FBI is uncovering crimes of Trump. The media, of course, is on the side of Democrats. That's why only Democrats trust them. And that was the polling data, and that was the setup. And we've shown you the polling data for many years, showing that only Democrats trust the FBI, the CIA, the security state. Here's the evidence about them trusting media corporations, and only Democrats trusting media corporations, which means these media corporations speak for and to only Democrats. Here is the attempt by MSNBC last night, in particular Joy Reid, to grapple with the fact that the person that these people go on the air every night and call a racist and a fascist and a criminal and an insurrectionist and a dictator and a Trump and a Putin lackey was just overwhelmingly chosen in the biggest margin in the history of the Iowa caucus to be the next president. Watch them grapple with all of this and try and come up with an explanation. You'll never guess what Joy Reid's explanation is for why Trump remains so popular despite all this.
New Hampshire.
And I think to the point that you made, Steph, I mean, it's the elephant in the room. She's still a brown lady that's got to try to win in a party that is deep.
Okay, this is Joy Reid trying to explain why not just Trump won, but Nikki Haley, who, let me remind you, used to be the governor of South Carolina. And the reason she used to be the governor of South Carolina was because the people of South Carolina first elected Nikki Haley and then re-elected Nikki Haley. And she served as governor of South Carolina, a very Republican state, after being chosen to be the Republican nominee for governor for 8 years. Here's Joy Reid explaining why her candidate, Nikki Haley, came in third place last night, and the person she believes is Satan, or worse than Hitler, came in first. Listen to this explanation.
The point that you made, Steph, I mean, it's the elephant in the room. She's still a brown lady that's got to try to win in a party that is deeply anti-immigrant and which accepts the notion that you can say immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. She's getting, birthered by Donald Trump. And I don't care how much the donor class likes her, which will ramp up a lot, the better she does in New Hampshire. So it's still a challenge. I don't see how she becomes the nominee of that party with Donald Trump still around. I can't picture it happening. Maybe it could happen. Ron DeSantis' only argument for staying in it is he's the white guy, that he can still make the appeal to white evangelists.
While we have
Joy Reid, I honestly think Rachel Maddow is the single most pathetic person in media, just because the way she has disseminated disinformation and lies and crazy conspiracy theories while pretending to be a highly influential and serious journalist and being cast as that by these other people is without parallel. But Joy Reid is just a very hateful and pathetic person that every time there's an event that she can't understand, and there are a lot of events she can't understand, the only explanation to which she can resort, the only explanation she can turn to, the elephant in the room, is that everybody is a racist, or else they'd be doing what she wants and thinking and like she does and seeing the world the way she does. She's so filled with racial hatred. It just oozes out of every pore. And this is not a critique I make easily about people. But like I said, I mean, the Republican Party is, the reason Nikki Haley is a candidate is because she was twice elected governor of South Carolina. And yet Joy Reid's explanation for why she's not winning isn't that she's such a oozing establishment puppet, that she supports every single war, that she sounds like Joe Biden in almost every instance. It's that she's a brown lady. And the only alternative and asset that Ron DeSantis has is that he's the white guy and that Donald Trump is the white guy. Her brain is just broken. It never gets past this most primitive analysis. And she calls it the elephant in the room, meaning no one else is talking about it. The reason no one else is talking about it is because it's so blatantly hateful and stupid. But what this really is that these people cannot grapple with the fact that the people of this country don't do what they're told, that they tune out people like that they don't listen to them, they have no audience, they have no influence, they have no power. Here is the Georgia poll that we just referenced that came out just today. There you see Trump with a 7-point lead in Georgia. The last time this poll was taken is from a University of Georgia poll. Trump was actually tied with Biden. It was 45-45. Biden has lost 7 points. Trump has remained the same. This is a state, again, that Joe Biden was declared the winner of in 2020. And in all 6 of those key swing states, with the exception of Wisconsin, Trump has now had a lead for at least 2 months over Biden in every one of those states, which shows you that it's not just the Republican Party and MAGA voters and Trump voters, but voters across the spectrum that, at least for now, are saying they want Donald Trump to be president, not only despite the fact that he's been indicted 4 times, but in large number because of that. And I don't think it can be overestimated, overstated, overdiscussed how very revealing that is and very disturbing that is of the way in which these U.S. institutions of authority, because of their own misconduct, because of their own corruption, because of their own deceit, have justifiably lost the faith and trust of most of the American population. Only American liberals, only Democrats trust these institutions. The rest of the country doesn't, and it is a huge problem for them as they try and put roadblocks in front of Donald Trump on his way back to the White House. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.